I discovered at the age of 5 that I had a sort of an affinity to the arts. And I was visiting my grandmother, and was given a poem to recite on Children's Day. And it's extremely exciting. It was in the country, in the woods, little wooden church. But what I wasn't prepared for was nobody but me apparently knew their speech. All the country kids came unprepared, and the audience greeted it with laughter. And at the age of 5, I thought there was something wrong with that picture. I said, "This is not fair." They're laughing at the kids. They don't know their poems. They're embarrassed, and the adults are not helping. They're laughing at them. And at the age of 5, it was like not to get up and say a speech, but to teach that group a lesson. And it didn't turn out too good. In my anxiety to get to the stage when my name was called, I stumbled and they laughed at me, and I thought, this is not right. They're laughing at me and haven't given me a chance. And I ran to my grandmother's house, and my mother had to come get me, which was the greatest thing could have happened, because I thought I was on the floor. It was the first time I had to get up when I was knocked down. And I returned to the church, and there was no more laughing, though. Everybody was quiet. They didn't ask me to say the speech, but I was told later I could say it that night at a different church, and I did. But it was a totally different atmosphere, and I learned from that I could have an impact on people's lives. And so that stuck with me. And at the age of 14, I became a guitarist. I played that in a church. Later on, I started playing the piano at 18. And then I should back up and say I'm from rural Mississippi. I came to Minnesota at the age of 19 and became a postal clerk. And it was there, after about 10 years, I said, I think I want to, the arts were pulling at me. And I said, classical guitar or theater? And a friend of mine says, I think it's too late for classical guitar. You're starting kind of late. I kind of, in a way, regret that, but I mean, so I hit theater at the age of 30. Did community theater for, I don't know, 12 years, and before I got my professional card, Actors Equity Association, and about 8 years later, I got my big break in Chicago at the Goodman Theater. And that show took me to Broadway and across the country. And so I have been doing 3 things kind of since I was 14, I should say. The guitar in public, piano at 18, and acting in my early 30s, which has really, really consumed me. Acting is an incredible art, incredible art. I could go on and on about acting as an art as opposed to the other art forms like ballet, or opera, or symphony orchestras and that kind of a thing. And I'll shut up in a minute and allow you to jump in and ask another question, but I'd like to say that this is my big disappointment in the way my profession is viewed. Acting is such an incredible disrespect for the art of acting. And really, if you really get into it, I consider it the most difficult form, because your body is the instrument that you use to play music with. Your body is the movement, the dance. Acting incorporates it all. The symphony, the classical music, it's all, if you study the art of acting, it's all contained. All of those art forms are contained in it. If you learn how to bring them together and get on stage, it's magic. It's incredible. It's like flying. It's like soaring like an eagle, looking over the landscape. In my case, coming from rural South, it took me 45 years to get a handle on standard English. I mean, the way that I wanted to do, to use it, to enable me to do what I wanted to do on stage. I was paused.
So the rural South is in the background of this.
Absolutely.
What did that give you?
That was an incredible experience, growing up in the rural South. Not only just growing up in the rural South, I was born in a school dormitory in the Mississippi Delta, out in the country from a place called Jonestown, Mississippi. Drama surrounded my birth. My sister said she was upstairs and heard my older sister pounding on the door where I was being born, demanding to be allowed entrance, and people had to hold the door to keep her out. She was about 11 years old at the time. Very dramatic, high-strung person. Her life story, I could write several books about her. But, and then by the time I got to the place where I grew up, I'd lived in, that was the fourth place that I had lived by the time I reached the age of 3. I was at this place called Swan Lake. That was the name of the little community because of the Swan Lake Baptist Church, and my dad was the principal of the school right next to it. And we were there one year when my father built a school in Coahoma, Mississippi, also in the Delta. We were there one year when he became principal of the school in Hernando, Mississippi. And about the time I turned 3, we were headed to Winona, Mississippi, where I grew up. But I lived on a school campus until I came to Minnesota. When I married in Mississippi, my wife stayed with me in the house on the campus where I grew up. And this was my first real venture into the real world, well, you know, the other world, lived in the other world, off campus. I had to deal with the other world because at some point when I was a kid, I had to go to public school. Now, that, getting off that campus, that campus life was a beautiful world to live in. It was a world of its own. And when I got to Winona, Mississippi, that's when my father had decided to start from scratch and build a school with nothing. And he decided that he had this school for handicapped and underprivileged children. That's one of the greatest experiences a person can have, is to live among people of all different stripes, people with different mental capacities, and how people adjust and live with what they were given, what they came here with. I saw incredible people who were blind, who were, they call them the lame and the halt, the retarded, and they all had personalities, and I was fascinated by the personalities of all of these people. Some of them became my friends. They taught me some of the greatest lessons you can learn in life, how to take what you have and use it. And some of those people were so incredibly talented. I mean, I heard kids who could sing, and I've never heard anybody since could sing like those kids. This one kid who walked on crutches all of his life, he was born deformed, had only one normal leg, and he could dance on those crutches. He could make music almost. He could do ballet, or you name it. The most beautiful things that I've seen was him walking on his crutches, running on his crutches, dancing on his crutches. That's just one example. Just hundreds and hundreds of examples of these incredible people who we think of as being handicapped and having limitations, who had skills that's far beyond anything that I've seen anybody do who's considered normal. So that's the one thing. And I have to say this because it was just incredible, the language. When I got here, I had difficulty communicating with a lot of people in Minnesota. My language seemed foreign to them. The community I lived in, there were just all kinds of languages. I mean, it was all, basic English, but it's English in its all different forms and accents, all those kinds of things. Just to give you an example how extreme it was, there was one kid at my father's school who seemed normal until he opened his mouth. He couldn't talk. And what I mean by he couldn't talk, he couldn't carry a conversation with you. But if you got him angry, he would curse like a sailor. But the deal is, if you didn't understand his lingo, you thought it was gibberish. And I was able at some point to realize he was cursing me out. But the deal is, he talked in vowels and left consonants out. And so when you start hearing the music of vowels in his language, so this guy, where did he get all these curse words from? But if you weren't around him, you would say this is one of those retarded people who's making gibberish. But he somehow he picked up vowels, but the only thing he could formulate was when you made him angry was to just profanity, turn the air blue with profanity. That was just one example. Or the time that when my mother's friend told me to go down to the corner where the blind man bagged his popcorn. It was fascinating to watch him bag his popcorn on the corner downtown by the 5 and dime store. And I was at her house. She says, "Danny, go down and get me a bag of peanuts from Blind Lemon." And she had a guest on her front porch. Says, "You go get Camel Goober Bites." And I'm thinking, I can't walk away from this man. I must answer him. I knew he was asking her questions by his inflections. But what am I supposed to do? You don't walk away from a person without answering. And he kept repeating, "You go get Camel Goober Bites." And I'm stunned. I don't know what to do. And my mama's friend saw the predicament that I was in. And so she says, "He's asking you if you're going to go down to Blind Lemon and buy me some peanuts." I said, "Oh, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir." And what he was saying is, "You go get Campbell," was the lady's name, Mrs. Campbell. "You go get Campbell Goober Bites." That's his way of saying you're going to buy her some peanuts. These are the kinds of things that I dealt with growing up as a child. And these are just extreme examples. It was all kinds of ways people express themselves. And I'm hearing all this, and all this sort of, informed my speech subconsciously. So when I got to Minnesota, especially when I got to the post office, it's really funny how these guys, they were nice people, they ran the gamut like anywhere. That's one thing. I'm fascinated with people. And just for the purpose of, making the picture clearer, the guys who, we label as white, they were having the most difficulty understanding me. And some of them didn't want to say, and I could understand that because I had been in the same predicament, even with the guy who's saying, "You go get Campbell Goober Bites." And the funniest one was a guy who started working at the post office the same time I did, and he talked with this very thick accent. And he was always very friendly, and I always would share things with him, but when I'd get excited, my speech would kind of, get a little more difficult to understand. And this one day I was excited about something, and I was trying to share it with him, and he was just ignoring me, like I wasn't saying a word. And I'm saying, "What's the matter with OJ? What's the matter with him? He's never been this way before." And I just said, I'm excited. I want to tell this story. I'm going to tell him this story whether he responds or not. And he finally just stopped and looked at me. He says, he pronounced my name Clark. It was, Clark, Danny Clark. He says, "Clark," he said, "you will have to speak in English if you want me to understand you." And he made the mistake of saying it again in a different setting, and another black guy heard this, and he just fell apart. The black guy fell apart. He was laughing so loud you could have heard his voice and an entire city block. And what was funny about it, OJ thought he was laughing because somebody finally told Danny Clark to speak in English. He was laughing because this guy had the nerve to tell somebody else to speak in English. That's just one example of, but that we were talking about speech, right? And we were talking about Mississippi. Well, backing up to Mississippi, let me tell this story and we'll move on. But I find this whole thing about, being in the South and all of these restrictions, I found some of that very amusing. On the campus, the campus was a great world to be on. My mother had to tell me, when you go off this campus, there's a different world out there. You have to deal with restrictions. You're someplace you can't go to. It's off limits to you. And they made it easy when they put a sign up, saying white only or that kind of thing. I knew you don't go in that place, but then there were other places there were no signs. But you could get in a lot of trouble if you walk through those doors. And I found that interesting that some places they put a sign up, white only, or say you go to a water fountain, they have one over here says white only, one over here says colored only, and I'm thinking, Here's two white mountains. One says white only, one says colored only. And the court, this big gray courthouse, had these two little white doors on the side, and one says, and they were public toilets, and one says white only, one says colored only. These two big white doors, and they're using colors to describe. I found that interesting about how color. I still can't figure out how this color thing got so intermingled and even this color thing, it kind of guide our lives. I feel too much, and I find that amusing. And this is one incident that really stuck with me. I was a little boy and I was downtown. This is in this little town here in Mississippi, and there was some excitement on because people were crowded around somebody. A circle. I couldn't see because I was on the outside, but this black lady was looking with this extreme disapproval and the kind of distraught look on her face. These things like this catches my attention. So she was watching, and I could see the anxiety in her face. And finally she said, "He's making the rest of us look bad." There was something about that didn't set right with me. I just assumed it must have been another black person in the circle that was attracting this attention. And yet she's saying he's making the rest of us look bad. I didn't even know who it was. I'd never seen who the person that was attracting the attention, but she was almost distraught and almost like in a helpless tone says, "He's making the rest of us look bad." That didn't make any sense to me. And then I looked over and here again, this white guy had a whole different take on what he was watching. And I have to stop here and say that we used to say grinning like a chess cat. And until I got here and found out that people meant the Cheshire cat, in the Alice in Wonderland story or whatever. But they didn't say Cheshire, they said chess. So I don't like the term Cheshire cat because all my life I heard chess cat. So I use, grinning like you're trying to eat a banana sideways. That fits me. Like you eat a banana this way, but you're trying to sideways. So so he was he was showing as many as he could, and he was enjoying what he was watching. Here's one human being saying he's making us look bad, and another human being that's enjoying it. That stuck in my mind. And when I hear phrases like that, even to this day, I says there's something wrong with this form of communicating. I says, these are two human beings standing watching the same thing and have a total different take on it. And it was like, my God. And now I think of, are we living in parallel universes side by side? Are we speaking the same language and yet talking past one another? Because the language informs our background and our backgrounds are so different that we can't even communicate because I'm saying one thing, you're saying the same thing, and it means something totally different. Anyway, that's kind of, and I just found different things like that. But I'm amused by so many things that human beings and how they react and things that come out of their mouths. And one more example of this is when I was a little boy, I went to this place where it's Lexington. Not there's a lot of Lexingtons I found out, Lexington, Mississippi. And this man was turning gray. This preacher was in the pulpit. It was a top sort of what they call a district meeting, I believe, where people came from different districts in the jurisdiction, and they came together under this roof. And I'm thinking, I'm just a kid. I think I was in my teens by then. And he's saying, I figured he was trying to have a discourse with the audience about race. He didn't stay on it too long, but what he said baffled me. He said, birds of a feather flock together. And I'm like, wait a minute, birds of a feather flock together? What does it have to do with human beings? We are human beings. We are advanced beyond birds. And if he's going to say people who sort of resemble each other flock together because birds of a feather flock together. I said, is something wrong with this picture? It's just, and I've thought about that ever since. I hear that, right now, birds of a feather flock together. Okay, fine. No, I never I can't have a conversation with birds. They tweet, you know what I mean? But I've never heard a bird, I wouldn't go and recite Shakespeare to a bird, It's things like that. I find those things amusing and puzzling, and how people use the language. I'm really I'm into language because it took me a long time to get a handle on. It took me 45 years to be able to speak standard English without having this, oh God, let me see now. Yeah. So, but anyway, that's just an example of how I find people fascinating, how they talk and how they express themselves and how they use certain examples. I understand, people using animals as examples, but sometimes I think we take it too far. Just like the Bible talks about the sluggard considering the ways of the ant. Okay, I get that. I get a lot of examples, of how, we can learn things from dogs and pigs, but I don't get people comparing how a bird operate with with how people operate. That's, one other thing on this that I'm going to, I can get off this though, and I hear people saying, that's the way they are. And if they're talking about a pig eating slop or wallowing in mud, okay, if I go to a farm and the kids show a kid a pig eating slop and wallowing in mud, and the pig, and the kid say, why does that pig eat slop and wallow in the mud? The simple thing is to say, that's a pig. That's what they do. That's the pigs eat slop and wallow in mud. That's the way they are. But I hear somebody talking about another human being. Say, wait a minute. There's something wrong with this picture. And I've heard otherwise intelligent people make statements like that. That's the way they are. Oh, come on now, man. Would love to say to that person. Now, if I'm at a farm and I tell a kid that's the way they are, and I'm talking about a pig, I think I can reasonably think that if the pig was Chinese, if the pig was Russian, if the pig was British, if the pig was African, the pig was South American, I would think that pig probably would eat slop and would wallow in mud, unless the person who owns the pig puts him in a different kind of an environment. But I think any of those pigs would be comfortable eating slop and wallowing in the mud. That's a universal trait, I'm thinking, of pigs. But I would think that when we get to human beings, I don't get this disconnect, because I'm thinking, wow, I look up and I see the sky. And I think wherever I am in the world, I look up, I'm going to see the same sky. And I'm thinking this air that I'm breathing is the same air that, of course, I know we air condition it sometimes and we pollute it. But I see that we are universally connected as human beings. So I think of human beings as being my universal brothers and sisters. And I say, and I go back to this lady saying he's making us look bad, and a guy grinning from ear to ear. And I'm saying, here's two human beings who seem to be living in two different worlds. And I can go on and on, but the South, you were talking about the South. Yeah, and so that's the kind of way I grew up, and that was my thought process. And when I got to Minnesota, I said, oh, wait, this is a different world. I didn't see any white only and colored only. And I says, oh, so then the barriers have come down. I can express myself to these people, that are labeled white and whatever, I have to say this though, I was fascinated on my third job. I was only here 8 months when I got my best job, $2 an hour. Whoa. My first job was only $1 an hour. My second job was $1.25 an hour. And I had a family. At that point, my wife was, pregnant with our first child, so I needed more than $1 an hour, $1.25 an hour. I got this job making $2 an hour. This large place, the post office, and all of these guys, and some of them were going to school, getting their college degrees, some were getting their master's degrees, some were getting their PhDs, and I'm saying, wow, I can sit and talk with these highly intelligent people, about human relations. But I was struck by the fact that we would have these intelligent conversations, then somebody would bring up race to me. I didn't mind. Okay, tell me, you want to talk to me about race? Come on, feed it to me. But I was struck by the questions that were asked to me. It didn't make any sense to me. And I'm saying, wait a minute now. This doesn't make any sense. Just to give an example, some people, I notice now people are kind of squeamish about offending people. It's hard to offend me, a human being, to offend me talking and telling me what they think. I want to know what you think. We're human beings. Let's share thoughts. And this one guy came to me, out of the clear blue, he says, every black person that I have ever met carry a knife. And I thought that, wow, every black person he's ever met carry a knife? I didn't know how to respond to it, so I says, I don't carry a knife. I don't know a black person who carries a knife. He paused and says, well, for everyone like you, there are 10 who carry a knife. So I didn't know what to say to that. We worked together for years, but he never said anything to me again about race. And that was fine with me. But I found that amusing. And this one guy would come and sit next to me. I was sitting there and throwing mail. Nice young man, probably around my age. I was about 20 years old, and he would just start talking to me. He would say, but he never had anything nice to say about people who looked like me. But he was being honest. I love when people are honest and say what they're thinking. And he would say, I would never sell my house to a black man. He never asked me what I thought about anything. And he says, I would never sell my house to a black man. I said, I listened. He says, I wouldn't want to get on the bad side of my neighbors. I'm thinking you're moving, what neighbors are you talking about? Why are you worried about people who you... But I didn't say anything because he didn't ask. He'd go on about his business and he'd come back again and he says, I've never seen a pretty black woman. That's fine. Have you never seen a pretty black woman? You never seen a pretty... I didn't say a word, And he would come, he'd see me sometimes. He'd run and sit beside me and start telling me this stuff. And finally he said one day, he says, I like talking to you, Danny. You have an open mind. He says, well, now I can't talk to Joe because Joe gets angry. If I try to share my thoughts with Joe about black people, he gets angry. He said, but you don't, Danny. You have an open mind. I love talking to you about race. I thought to myself, well, I haven't said a word yet. He's doing all the talking, but if that's the way he interprets, that's fine with me. And so this is the end of this particular story, because this guy had to dwell on him a little more than the others because he kept coming back to me with all these things, and they were all negative, And finally one day, this is about the time when I guess President Eisenhower had ordered the federal troops into Little Rock, Arkansas, because they were trying to integrate the Central High, I believe. Yeah, Orville Faubus, I believe, was the governor. And I was sitting next to a guy who I don't know where he came from. One of the nicest guys I have ever met, and I mean that sincerely. I can pick up vibes from people. I know when I'm sitting next to a person who has a good heart and feels good about people. So I was enjoying the conversation, but whenever he referred to black people, he used what we call the N-word. But he said it was just as gentle, and nice. And then I realized that he didn't know that that's considered to be an offensive word. So at some point I told him, I says, the word doesn't bother me at all. I says, but I wouldn't advise you to put that in your conversations with black people. Some people take offense to that, and some get very angry, and some people can get violent. And he thanked me for the information, but it was another guy on the other side of him who had one conversation with me, overheard it, and they went on break. And when they came back from break, he was apologizing to me, so he practically went to his knees, and I told him, no, you didn't offend me, But I said, what did that guy say to him on break to have him so scared that he felt he had to come, and go through that? But he finally, pulled himself together, and we continued our conversation, which was pleasant. And the guy who had always told me, you know, he never saw a pretty black woman, he wouldn't sell his house to a black person. He came down the big aisle and looked up and he saw me and he practically yelled and hollering, you know, running down, coming toward me, you know, in a frenzy. Says, Danny, what do you think about them shoving integration down those kids' throat in Little Rock, Arkansas? First time he had asked me a question. So I thought what I said was a reasonable thing. I says, I have a better idea. I says, let them switch schools. He stopped in his tracks like somebody had hit him with a baseball bat. His mouth dropped open, and he backed out of the aisle with his mouth open looking at me. And I saw him only once from that day to this. And then one time I saw him, he was walking across an open space from one building to another, and he saw me and turned his head away. And I said, oh, God, I like that guy. I wonder what happened to him. What informed his thinking that one question I answered that he asked me, it had that impact on him. Where were we? But yeah, that's kind of, and I left Mississippi when I was 19 years old. And I was a guitarist, at 14 and piano player at 18. And as I said, I was in my 30s when I decided I wanted to get back to the arts. That's how I got into acting. And I took speech training in 1968. And this year, 2013, March 29th, I realized that after all of my studying books on speech, because my teacher just basically tried to drill my southern accent out of me and left me with a colorless, standard, clear speech that sounded like someone droning on, almost like a town crier. And it wasn't conversational. And I had to work against that. And it took me 45 years to undo the damage that was done initially in my speech training. I had to do it on my own, reading all kinds of books on speech, and I could go on and on about all the efforts I made to try to get a grip on how can I have a handle on standard speech and sound natural, sound like anybody else talking, and not sound like somebody stentorian and orating and maybe, the town cry, midnight and all is well, that kind of a thing. But March 29th, when I realized that all the basic ingredients, for using standard English were falling into place, I stood in the mirror and gave myself a standing ovation. And I've had epiphanies along the way. On my 70th birthday, I had my first epiphany about why I was struggling with my speech. And that's when I realized that the arts are interconnected. When I had that epiphany at the age of 70, it changed my piano playing. I could sing when I was little. I had a voice that almost couldn't match that kid who walked on crutches. I never heard anybody could sing like that, like him. But I had a pretty incredible voice myself, and I had a trauma, which I won't get into, that could take all day, that took my voice away. I could still talk and speak, but I couldn't sing. And my voice, that voice came back to me this year, recently, when I was at the piano trying to, believe it or not, trying to play Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And when I said Somewhere Over the Rainbow, it came out the way I heard my voice when I was prior to my 14th birthday. And I was so struck by it, I went to the mirror to give myself another standing ovation, and I couldn't. I clapped 1 or 2 times and broke down and cried. The emotion was just overwhelming. So that's kind of, kind of, a little insight into how I function, for want of a better word.
The picture I'm getting about your youth in the South is that at least for quite a long time you were protected from the really harmful influences by the school and by being around people who were different and accepting difference. Um, and that when you entered the other society outside the school, you were able to take a sort of detached attitude, to find it funny, to find it interesting, and not to be harmed by it. So, do you feel like you got out of Mississippi pretty clean? I mean, without being harmed by the stuff that I know wrecked a bunch of other people.
Oh yes, oh yes. Yes, 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 yes. I mean, to escape being lynched, to escape with your life, people don't realize the adjustments that you have to make in the South just to just to walk down the street. There's just a whole set of rules that informs a black person's attitude and their perception of it's totally different. People don't realize what is going on inside of a black person's head as they walk down a public street. You have to be alert at all times. You can't make the wrong move, because if you make the wrong move, it could be the difference between life and death. That was a reality that I had to deal with. But you know, I had, gosh, how do I say this? The greatest lesson that I was ever taught as a human being was my mother taught it to me without saying a word. That whole thing about teach by precept and example, or action speaks louder than words. In the outer society that I stepped into, I was given an incredible base for dealing with it by my mother, who never said a word. It was a very simple thing she did. That was who she was. If there was a knock on the door, and when she opened the door, I noticed this as a child. She opened the door, it was another human being. Whether they were old, young, black, white, rich, poor, it was another human being. I never, for 1 second, saw my mother look at another human being and not see just that, another human being. And the one thing that really left an impression on me is we had a few town drunks. Town wasn't that large. So you had black sections in the community. We had the Brickyard is where we lived, the Brickyard, and you could see Campbell Hill. I used to like to, in the east, I used to like to get up in the morning and let the shade up, and as the sun rises over Campbell Hill. I found that fascinating, the sun rising in the east, and how you look up and see the skies, and looks like that just curved right down beyond the farthest tree. And it's like if I could just walk over there, I could touch the sky. I found that fascinating. But getting back to the town drunk, one of the town drunks came one day and my mother stopped what she was doing. He was sober at the time, he wasn't drunk at the moment. And she sat down and entertained him as a guest. And if he had been royalty, she wouldn't have given him any more attention than that's the way she were. That informed my relationship with fellow human beings. That was instilled in me without her ever saying a word. She never, in telling me how to survive, she never one time said, "You're just as good as anybody." She never said that to me. She never sat down and said an unkind word about any human being. I never heard her wasting any time in a negative conversation about anybody. She had this incredible positive outlook. And so that informed me more than anything, is just being around my mother. She was my number one hero until I got married. Then she had, of course, had to be number two, because my wife became my number one hero. And did I miss the question?
Well.
And yeah, but you know, yes, that's this whole thing of navigating my way through off campus. Oh, absolutely. I can think of things that happened where I was saying, "Oh, whoa, that was close. That was close." I've had those experiences where you say, "Oh, I think did I make the wrong move? What are the consequences going to be? That was real. That was real. There was no getting around that. But every situation like that, you know, nothing happened, and it was like, whew, you know, that was the whole first 19 years of my life. And as a matter of fact, when I had what I considered a harrowing experience just before I came to Minnesota. Several, you know, right after I married, I was only there 6 weeks, and in that short period of time, I had my wife then, so it changed. You know, my whole thing was not only me, but her. I have to look out for her. And just to, you know, not to make this thing dark, I don't want this to get dark, but my wife and you know, we've been neighbors for years. People were baffled by the fact she was always smiling and always laughing. I've had a lady come to me one time and says, "Is your wife always this way?" And I said, "All the time." And she walked away with me with her mouth open like, you know, she didn't know what to make of it. But that's what attracted my attention to her when we were kids. He was this little girl who didn't dress as nice as the other kids. To all intents and purposes seemed to be poor. But she had one thing that attracted my attention. She was always smiling. If wherever she was, it was sunshine all around her. That was a little girl that laughed. Had this laughter like I'd never heard before. Till even I had my little childhood sweetheart, as you would say. But when I would come home, I wouldn't talk about her. I was fascinated by this girl who laughed all the time and smiled all the time. And I would say to my mother, I would say, "Mama, whenever ever I get married," I knew marriage was a practical thing. You know, you have to think about long term, not this little, you know, heart fluttering kind of a thing that can't sustain you for 50 years. Your heart may not always flutter. So I was practical about it even as a child. So I would say, "Mama, whenever I get married, I want to marry somebody like Maddie." We called everybody by their full name, Maddie Mae Anthony. And my mother was a very quiet lady, wouldn't respond. And I'd come home from school time after time and say, "Mama, whenever I get married, I want to marry somebody like Maddie Mae Anthony." And one day she just stopped everything she was doing, just turned to me, and she talked very softly, and she had eyes like an eagle. I can see it now. She looked at you like she's looking clean through you. She looked me straight at me and said, "Son, the only way you'll marry someone like Maddie Mae Anthony, you'll have to marry Maddie Mae Anthony." So that was the last time I said to my mother that, because I thought there was nowhere on the horizon. I mean, you know, we lived in different worlds, different backgrounds, and that you know, I had my little girl I had a crush on, and I guess she must have had, and I thought no possibility of that ever happened, and lo and behold, it did happen. We ended up marrying, and it kind of happened, you might say, in a circuitous route. And I thought about it afterward. I said, "Wow, I married the girl that Mama said, you know, I would have to marry in order to, because I couldn't marry anybody like her." I got caught on that. What was it?
Well, that's great.
Bring me back.
You just got my next question was, I mean, I know you married young.
I know what I was going to say. I was talking about the harrowing experiences in the South. And I was just going to share this one without getting dark. She was in the car with me. I went to get some clothes from the cleaners. And it was the service station. The dry cleaners was right here. And the service station was right here. And the car, and I was in my dad's car, and as I drove up, she saw some people, and as that she knew, and just lit up everything. She was waving at the people, and this smile that's so radiant, and this indescribable radiant smile, which she always, you know. And I was getting out of the car, and I looked around, and there was 2 policemen coming out of this service station. And they were focused in on her like a laser beam. And they had a look in their eyes and a kind of a smile on their face that was scary. And I thought, You know, this is a helpless moment for me. I can't protect her. If they walked up and just grabbed her, there's nothing I could do. That was scary. That was very scary to me. So it was. That was my first thought. I says, I have to take her somewhere else. I can't protect her. I have to take her somewhere else. That was one. I'm gonna go to the other one because I don't like it. Conversation to get too heavy. But yeah, it's a whole. At least for me as a child, it was parallel universes because there were signs letting you know, reminding you, we live in parallel universes. And the rules for you are not the rules for us. We live by a different set of rules, and what is okay with us, you can lose your life for doing the same thing. That was clear to everybody. No, clear cut and defined very sharply in both camps. But you were saying you asked a question about being married young.
Your answers are better than my questions, so I don't care what you do.
Oh, you're kind.
Say what
Thank you.
say what you have to say, and don't worry about going to any territory you want to go to. Of all the places you could have moved from Mississippi, why Minnesota?
A question. I love it because I can answer that one. A question I've been asked many, many times. I was part of what they call the Exodus. There were several exoduses from the South. Excuse me. My history used to be really good, but I remember when the first one is where black people pulled up and moved north in droves. They always went in straight lines. Most people from where I lived went to Chicago. There was the Illinois Central Railroad that came straight through our town from Chicago to New Orleans. That's where most people from my town lived in Chicago. They had a Winona Club in Chicago. Most people from Florida, the Carolinas, Philadelphia, New York. Most people from, say, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Minnesota. When I got here, there's a lot of people from Arkansas and Texas. Everybody goes in a straight line. Then some people veer. Like in my case, it was Minnesota, kind of to Chicago and kind of take a northwest angle, and go all the way up here in cold country. But how I got to Minnesota, normally one person in the family will know somebody who has moved to, say, and they're in conversation with those persons, and they may say, come to where we are. And in most cases in our town it was Chicago. Now, why this guy who became a really good friend of mine, I mean, he was old enough to be my brother's father, but he was in the ministry, and my brother was a minister. He became a preacher at the age of, I think, 18, I think it was. I thought he was preaching all of his life. He sounded like he was always preaching, but he officially became a preacher at 18. And he became quite attached to an elderly preacher. And when he, decided he was going to pull up stakes and go north, my brother, when he finished high school, he said, why don't you go to Minnesota? I have a son who lives in Minneapolis and has a church in St. Paul. And so my brother came to Minneapolis as a result of that suggestion from this preacher. That's how he got here. And my sister, who was a couple of years older than him, who lives here now, as a matter of fact, she came to Minnesota because he was here. I came up and visited them and went on back. But then I had another brother who went to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because his wife's people, some of her people had got to Philadelphia. I don't know how they got to Philadelphia, but that's not on the line. That's not Chicago, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That's way out east, or east. And so he ended up, part of my family ended up in Philadelphia. My brother in Philadelphia wanted all of the family to be together in Philadelphia, so he was trying to lure everybody to Philadelphia. My sister and brother left here and went to Philadelphia, and my sister said, no way, no way, no way, no way, no way. She came back to Minneapolis. My brother stayed. When I got married, I took Maddie to Philadelphia. My sister was here, and sent me a telegram, says, there's jobs in Minnesota. You can get a job quick if you come here. Matt and I packed our things. We were there about 2 weeks and got on a bus and came to Minneapolis. That was January 1957. So that's how I got up here in Minneapolis. And let me add this. I got here in January, and I says, okay, now I've got to hit the pavement running. I've got this young wife who was she was very young. I was 19 and she was, I think, just about to turn 16, which is not unusual for some kids marry earlier than 15 in the South. So people say, you married a 15-year-old girl? Oh, some kids that married at the age of 12, 13, or 14. So that was nothing unusual. People had to grow up fast. Many people did in the South. 12-year-old kids had 20-year-old mentalities because of the brutal life that they had to, endure with. But anyway, here I am walking down Hennepin Avenue because I had heard that there were opportunities in the post office. So that was the first job. I kind of, I went and took the postal test to be a postal clerk. I'm walking down Hennepin Avenue, and like I walk down the street in Mississippi in January when it's 40, 50, or 60 degrees, and for some reason or other reached up to touch my ear and couldn't feel anything. And I said, there's something wrong with this picture, I'd better get inside. I stepped inside of a building and someone was saying, how cold is it out there? And it says 10 below zero. 10 below zero? Whoa, I never heard of such a thing. Whoa, no wonder I couldn't feel anything when I touched my ear. So that was my introduction to the weather in Minnesota. Is walking down Hennepin Avenue and thinking my ear was going to fall off.
Wow. So, what was your first brush with theater here?
Now you're getting on my topic now. When I was sitting in the post office talking to my friend, saying, I want to do something else. I just don't want to be a postal clerk the rest of my life. Classical guitar, theater, or maybe even just go back to school and decide later. And he suggested that classical guitar may be too late to pursue. So I called, looked in the yellow pages, found a place where there was I said, I got to get this speech training because I had too many experiences. I knew this much, that if I go on stage talking the way I talk, the audience wouldn't get the story, they would be gibberish to them. So that was my big challenge, just to get my speech cleaned up. And so that's kind of how it got started. I started taking speech training and drama at the same time, and I started doing community theater right away. This was 1968, May. I did my first play in October 1969 in community theater. At the time, which is now History Theater, it was called something else then, back in 1969, I think. Channel 2, I forget what they called it then, KTCA or something. They took it over for a year and called it Area Theater, and I did 3 shows there. Judgment Day, Luther, Comedy of Errors. And then I went to Theater in the Round and auditioned for one of the greatest directors I have in my world. Warren Frost was a university professor and also did theater on the side. He was directing at Theater in the Round, and I think it's my 4th play, 1970, my 4th play, and he cast me in Slow Dance on the Killing Ground, a 3-character play, and I played Randall, who was an 18-year-old kid in New York who, in the story, he had killed his mother and was on the lam, and stopped in this store where this Jewish store owner, and the whole place is about him in the store, and they interacting, and a young girl comes in and that kind of a thing. But excuse me. He was at the top of my list of directors. Warren Frost, who I met in community theater, was so good and was so right for me that I had my list of favorite directors. It was a half dozen people. He was always at the top of this list, and it was only a half dozen all through my career. I auditioned at the Guthrie when as a beginner. I went over to the Guthrie. That was my goal, to work at the Guthrie. That's the zenith of acting to work at the Guthrie. Here I am. And I go over and I audition at the Guthrie. 1969. Last year I made my debut at the Guthrie. 44 years later at the Guthrie. But Warren Frost, it's almost breathtaking that man, what he did for me as a director. And last year at the Guthrie, a guy's Minnesota born and bred, David Esbjornson, I believe. I think he said he grew up in southern Minnesota. I don't think he lives here anymore. I think he came in from New York, New Jersey or somewhere. He was like the reincarnation of Warren Frost. So that experience that I had at the Guthrie last year was just absolutely, it was like, wow. Because I mean, in the ensuing years, I ran across a lot of people who had no business in theater, really, to be honest about it. There's a lot of people who should not be in this business. But then you kind of start wondering, my God, you start saying, losing faith. But that experience I had at the Guthrie last year just renewed my faith. This is what it's all about. I've never worked in such a class outfit. That is a classical place. I'd heard about it, but just being there, I mean, they're classic. They're classic from the time you open the door. Everybody. It's just incredible. That was an incredible experience. And then I have my reincarnation. So David Esbjornson went right to the top. So now my favorite directors are Warren Frost and David Esbjornson. So I don't know if I...
So, did you know from the early plays that this was what you wanted to spend your life doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Being on stage is magic. 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 And I left out is I was permanently injured on my father's campus when I was 8 years old. Some families would have one handicapped child, and to keep the family together, they would send the whole family there. All their kids would come to my dad's school. So you had kids who were what we can call normal. They were all normal to me in their world. But just for the purpose of clarity, there are kids who didn't have certain physical disabilities and challenges. Some of those kids were along my age. We played together and became friends. Some of them could be rough. And when I was 8, they were 7, I think, both 7. They jumped me in the dark. In the South, dark, when you say dark, you can't see your hands in front of you. And I was at the back end of the campus, and all of a sudden I was up in the air. And this is the area where we played. The ground was very hard. And I crashed on the ground and something snapped in my head. And I was left there. I guess they left me there in the dark. It's a huge campus, and I'm back on the ground in the most incredible pain that I have ever experienced. Just unbearable pain. But I knew at the age of 8 I had to get up. I had to get up off the ground. I couldn't lay there. And I walked all the way to the building where at the time we lived on the 2nd floor. And I walked all the way to the building and walked the stairs and crawled up in my mother's bed. And my brother saw me, 2 years older than I, and he knew something was badly wrong. My mother was at church, and he ran all the way to church to tell my mother that I was hurt. And she came back and brought another lady with her. My mother was incredibly religious, didn't go to doctors, didn't believe in, she believed in faith healing. So she came there with the lady, and they kneeled by the bed. My mother always prayed quietly, The other lady may have been vocalizing, her calls to God to aid me, but my mother, I didn't hear a word from her. She was quiet. That's the way she prayed, very quietly. Powerful, though, and her presence was very powerful. And I lay there, how many days, I'm not sure, and just in this incredible pain. And at some point, I got up and resumed, my activity. And children have a way of shutting things out. I didn't realize that I was permanently injured and that I was in pain all the time. It was not as intense as when I walked from the back of the campus. So I shut it out. But then I'm getting back to theater. This is the part of the background, and I would be reminded at times, you know, I didn't know why. Hard work would just take all of my energy away, and people started saying that boy is lazy. That hurt really bad. That boy is lazy. You know, you expected to work hard to do back-breaking work, and whenever I tried to do it, sometimes I could go a while, and other times I had nothing left. And I could go on and on about that, but anyway, it was only when I was here in Minnesota that it was brought back to me. I was getting sick on my job. One time I was taken out on a stretcher and wheeled to the medical unit in wheelchairs. That was part of my experience working in the post office. Is getting the room start spinning on me and throwing up and that kind of a thing. And I've had incidents where I was brought home and had to lay flat on my back for 5 days and couldn't raise my head, which was similar to what I experienced when I was 8 years old, laying in the bed flat on my back for days. And try to condense this and weave it in. And so they eventually told me after 13 years at the post office that you have to retire. The work is too much for you. I've got a wife and 4 children. What are you talking about? I have a responsibility. I can't retire. But they say you can't do the work. But I said, well, I'm thinking I've been doing it for 13 years, you know what I mean? Except I had my problems, but then I was using up my sick leave. But whenever I could, get the strength, I would. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But I'm getting to this thing about theater. And when I was forced into disability retirement, I was already tinkering with theater. I was already going to school because that's what I kind of wanted to do. But I wasn't ready to do it, to give up my job. Then I was wanting to sort of transition from one profession to the other. But they pushed me out, because. But anyway, so when I had to make this new adjustment, not having my regular job and not being the sole provider, my wife had to go to work. It threw me into a depression. Because that's just, no, there's something wrong with this picture. But then I went to my doctor one day and I told him, I says, they say I can't do this anymore, but can I act? So he said, do you want to act? He says, my doctor, my primary doctor. I said, yes, I do. He says, if you can do it, go for it. And I discovered something that sometimes, I'm waiting to go on stage, waiting for my cue, and I'm leaning against the wall to keep my balance. Because since I had that accident at the age of 8, if I get tired, the room might start spinning, or the pain becomes so intense, I just fall, to the ground. And I would be backstage, holding the wall, and I hear my cue to enter the stage, and I off the wall and walk through those doors, and it was magic. There was no pain, there was no nothing. Once I walked onto that stage, I was that character. And until I come off stage again, it was like, wow, I did it again. I did it again. I did it again. And that was play after play. Never missed a rehearsal. Never missed a rehearsal for being ill. And then, but it was a nightmare. Like, what if it happens? That was the nightmare that loomed over my head all the time. What if I collapse during the show? What if the room starts spinning during the show? And that just hangled me like a pall. Until when I got my break at the Goodman Theater in Chicago. I'd never been in a situation like that before. I was replacing someone who was going to Hollywood to do a television show. And I had only 4 rehearsals, and I had to be ready to do a pre-Broadway show with people from New York who had been doing this show across the country. I was at a terrible disadvantage. The pressure was incredible. And I went blank. I couldn't learn my lines. I was rushing, trying to cram things, and nothing was happening. And it was like, oh my God. And August Wilson, the writer of the play, who I knew him before he got recognition. He started writing in St. Paul. Was walking down a side hall, and he saw me, which is August Wilson's habit, he talked to me in sound bites. Powerful what he would say to me. He was walking toward me, looking straight at me, and he said, when I'm writing, I hear a song, and kept walking. And it hit me like a thunderbolt. Whoa! I went to my hotel room that night, and I said, open this script. I said, I want to hear that song, because I've been hearing music in my head since I was a little boy. I said, I want to hear the song that August heard. And I started reading those lines, and I heard that song. When I heard that song, the lines came. The character, when I got the lines, I had the character and everything. So my movement was there in the song. I said the lines within the song, walked in the song. So that's what theater has done for me. And I realized, whoa, the nightmare is gone. Because in the meantime, I was so afraid of, my condition letting me down. I started taking medication to keep from getting dizzy. But I lost my voice in preparation in Chicago to get my character. And I said, if I lose my voice, I can't go on. So I went to a drugstore. I says, I'm having difficulty with my throat. I says, I take medication. I says, is there a possibility that medication is drying my throat out? And he says, yes, medication does dry your throat out. And I says, oh boy, this is a crossroads for me. Do I continue taking the medication and lose my voice? Or do I stop taking the medication and take a chance on a dizzy attack? I'm not sleeping much. I stopped taking the medication, didn't have a dizzy attack, got through the play, the nightmare went away. That was the last day I worried about losing my balance. That's one of the magic things that has happened with theater, but many, many more. But that's ultimately, it's like the magic of you are not sick. Whatever your condition is, it goes away for that moment where you are in that world of that character you have created. That character that the author puts on paper. He puts that character on paper, and you make those words become flesh. Those words jump off the page and become a part of you. And you do what Shakespeare say, which is most incredible. You hold a mirror up to nature and show virtue her feature and scorn its own image. It's nothing. Very few things can top that.
Thank you.